Hi everyone, I'm Jane, and today we are going to get to know detail brushes. When you're a beginner, it can be kind of confusing and hard to know which brush you should use for which technique. So today we're going to go over a few of the most common shapes and sizes, and I'm going to demonstrate what they can do, which ones do things a little better, which ones do things a little different. We're also going to go over some of the brush techniques that we'll be using throughout September and quite possibly beyond, as well as how to use matte medium and why. And then we'll finish the whole video off with how to properly clean and store your brushes so that they last you for a long time. This is the second video in our 30 Days of Art Challenge. Make sure that you are subscribed so that you can get notifications when our next videos come out. If you've missed any of the previous videos, you can click the information iCard up here, and that has the playlist for all of the 30 Days of Art videos. Now grab your detail brushes, a couple of small canvases or a piece of paper, and one or two paint colors to experiment with. And let's get started. Okay, so let's go over some of the most common shapes of detail brushes. These come in many, many sizes. I've got more of them up here, but they all pretty much do a very similar thing no matter their size. So we're just gonna go over one size of each style of these brushes. Now, when you first buy a set of brand new detail brushes, it can be a little bit confusing when you first get them if you get them and they're stiff. See how stiff that is? It's not soft. It almost feels like there's maybe paint or something that was left to dry in it. But what that is a material called sizing, and it's put into the brush intentionally when it's being manufactured to help protect it while it's being transported from the factory to the store and from the store to your house. Now you can easily just kind of break it like that. And now it's much softer. You can wash it if you want to, but you can also just take it and swish it in some water. Dry it off on a paper towel, and it should be good. You won't feel that sizing in there anymore after that. So the first brush we're going to talk about is an angle brush and what an angle brush is good for. So with an angle brush, you can get nice crisp edges. So I'm going to take my dry brush and load it in my matte medium, and we will talk more about matte medium in just a little bit. And I'm going to pull a little bit of paint out. See how I didn't stick it right down into that? I just came to the edge of the paint and just touched that and pulled it out. And that's it. Kind of laying it smooth, mixing the medium that's in my brush in with that paint that I pulled out. But I'm keeping my brush nice and flat. See how I still have my crisp edge? So to get a crisp edge with an angle brush, you want to make sure that that tip always drags. Don't try and draw a line like this, because that tip is going to crush and your line will be kind of wobbly. If that's what you're going for, that's fine. But if you want a crisp edge, always drag the tip of that angle brush. So we'll start here and we'll make a nice crisp line. I'm really only touching just the very tip of the angle brush, not the full length, but you can certainly do both if you have a nice steady hand. So there we have a line that ends at a nice sharp point. I like to draw with angle brushes. I know that some people have a hard time with that. And the secret to drawing with an angle brush is turning it. See how I'm just kind of rolling it lightly with my thumb. So to make like a curved S shape here, I'm going to start here, and as I come around, I'm slightly curving the angle brush in my hand. And I can get a curvy shape like that. Now if I don't turn it like that in my hand, here's what happens. Let's see, I'll start at this angle where I want it and come around and back. You get a ribbony shape, which is also a really cool technique, but it's really great that you can do both with this brush, just depending on whether or not you slightly turn it. You can even draw a circle if you're really good at turning the angle brush. One of my favorite things to do with an angle brush is to make lines that go from fat to thin. So kind of like our ribbon here, but let's do it in a straight line. So I'm going to start up here with very little pressure, and as I come down, I'm slowly applying more pressure until I have full pressure. And I can release it a little as I come back and end on a nice sharp point. So it's all just about how much pressure. I started just touching the tip of the brush, and here I had full pressure, pressed down all the way flat. Angle brushes are also really great for shading. You might sometimes see an angle brush actually referred to as a shader. That's something that I really like to use these for. And it's because of the length of the bristles, you don't get such hard edges like you would with a Filbert or a Bright. So we can start up here and just lightly back and forth, just lay some of that down. Let's grab a little bit of white. And we'll start right here below, come up into there. I'm just going back and forth. And we can get nice smooth blends. Also, you can do a crosshatch type technique. So very light pressure and really just barely touching the edge of the brush to the canvas. I'm not going to be laying it flat like we did here. So just the edge, just kind of work back and forth. And this is how you can get some nice, interesting texture. So this is actually very similar to the way we filled in the wall on the video with the lonely chair from a couple of weeks ago. Very similar technique. I didn't use an angle brush, but you can certainly use this for something like that. And see, now we can start building a little bit of layer, even though it's all the same color, a little bit of layers and some textures, just because of light pressure with the brush stroke that we chose to use. And we don't have too many hard lines at the beginning or end of those brush strokes. Next, we're going to talk about brights. And this is my number 8 bright. Now, brights are typically shorter than flats. I know that it can kind of be confusing, the difference between a flat and a bright, because they look essentially the same. Another thing that makes them a little confusing is there's not really a standard length to either flats or brights. So in one company, the length of my bright here might be the length of their flat, and the length of their bright might be about half of mine. So I know that that's confusing, but these are my brights, and if I were to have flats, they would probably be about 1/8 of an inch longer than this, as you'll see later. So brights are really good for drawing, especially sketching. I like to sketch with a bright because it helps me do my sketches quite loosely. You can also press in the corner. So unlike the angle where I said don't press in the corner, pressing in the corner of flat brushes gives you some really interesting effects. You can certainly use these for shading, but I find that I get too much of a striped look and too many hard edges when I use these for shading, but you certainly can. So let's go ahead and get some matte medium in there. And some paint. I'm just using black and white for this part. And let's start drawing a line. So unlike an angle brush where I said just put the very, very corner of the brush on there, you can put the whole edge on, and just with light pressure, just bring it down to a line. We can do a curved line. Just like with an angle brush, you still want to kind of roll it in your hand if you want a nice smooth line. But you can certainly do that ribbony effect as well by not turning it. Let's just fill that in a little bit more. I was running out of paint. And these canvas boards have quite a lot of texture on them. All right, so there's our ribbony line. You can make circles with them as well, again, as long as you're comfortable with the turning part. So you really can do just about anything with this that you can with an angle brush. I'm a little bit more comfortable with the angle brush for doing lines and things like this, so that's what I default to, but some people prefer a bright or a flat instead. To some extent, you can do the fat to wide line like you can with the angle brush, though it's not going to be quite as controllable, especially at the end here. Let's do a little bit of shading. So like with our angle brush, I'm just going to start here at the top, lay some down. Get me some white, start just below, and slowly back and forth up into that first color. and slowly back down. Very light pressure to go back over it to smooth anything out, because it does make it a little bit more striped, I feel like, than the angle brush does. And that's not wrong or bad, it just depends on the look you're going for. Now the crosshatch pattern, like we did with the angle brush, we can do that here too, but because we have such a hard, sharp edge, we are gonna see the shape of the brush stroke a little bit more. And again, that's not wrong or bad, it's just gonna depend on the look that you're going for. But see, we can see the edge of that brush stroke a lot stronger than we could with the angle brush. Still just using light pressure and kind of back and forth. So using this brush on the corner can do some really fun things. It can help insinuate maybe distant flowers or even foliage. And I'm just gonna tap the corner. See, I almost get like a little heart shape. And you can kind of just come in here and break up a line, maybe insinuate some bushes or something in there. When that corner is all used up, flip it around to the other corner. There's one more thing I want to show you here that I don't like to do with this brush, but I'm going to show you because later on I'm going to do it with the Filbert, and I do like to do this with the Filbert. So you can take your brush and like tap and turn and tap and turn. Kind of just every time it touches, just turn it around. And I feel like that just looks really fractured, and sometimes I get these really random shapes that are nice. Sometimes I get these square, flat shapes. So I don't do this with my flat brush very often, next to never. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about Filberts. So remember when I said that brights are shorter than flats, and I would show you how long a flat in my line would be later on. Well, my Filberts are quite long. And if you notice, this is both my number 8 bright and my number 8 Filbert. See how much longer my Filbert is than my bright in the center here? And a Filbert is essentially the same thing, just with the corners cut off, and it's just slightly more tapered. So if I had flats, that's about how long they would be. So my number 8 bright is actually my favorite brush right now. I use this brush on almost every single painting. So I got some matte medium and some black. Now, Filberts are actually not wonderful for drawing, I don't think. Some people may really like to draw with them, but I don't care for it. It's possible, but I feel like I just have better control with a flat or an angle. But let's go ahead and compare still. We'll draw some lines like we did before. And see, it's a little bit wider and it breaks up a little bit more. It's not quite such a hard line. So if you wanted a nice soft line, a Filbert might be the way to go. Let's do our little curved line. Again, see how soft it is. And our ribbon line. Again, quite soft. I guess I'll pretend to draw a circle with this, even though it's not going to turn out real great. See, even though I turned the brush, it got a lot fatter there. It's just because of the shape of the bristles, they start to kind of drag around each other. And our thin to fat to thin, and it tapers out, and it didn't end very sharp like the other ones. But what Filberts are really great for, and you can certainly fill in rounded shapes with them. Get that nice crisp edge, but it's very round. So it makes it a lot easier to fill in something round than it would with a flat or bright, or even an angle. You can also make leaves with Filberts, and I really like to do that. So I'm gonna start right here with a thin line, press flat, and release. You can get all kinds of these little interesting shapes, like for flower petals or whatever. You can even come like that and turn the brush a little bit. So I took it on the edge, dragged it down a little bit, and as I pressed, I rolled it so that it ended flat. These are pretty good for shading. because they don't have a hard edge. But again, I think I still prefer an angle to shade with. See how the edge, I don't have those square points. So pick up some white. Again, starting just below it, back and forth, work my way up and back down. I definitely get a much smoother blend without so much work as compared to the bright. That crosshatch pattern, let's try that. So super light pressure. I don't really care for that. It deposits more paint, I feel like, than the other ones. I feel like I can see the edge of the brush stroke. Not so much the tip of it, but the sides. And I just feel like that's a little bit stripey looking for me for this technique. So I probably wouldn't use a Filbert for that. But remember the thing that I showed you with the flat that I don't like to do? I love to do that with the Filbert. So what I'm gonna do is tap the canvas, and every time I tap, I'm just gonna roll it about a quarter of a turn one way or the other and get some random type shapes. So just kind of like that. See, it almost looks like a leaf, just that. Even on the edge, just kind of start tapping and dotting. And I don't get any of those hard square edges like I did with the bright. So I really like to do this for foliage and grass and leaves and even flowers. And we'll actually be doing quite a bit of that with our Filbert in next week's painting. You know what I actually want to show you with the Filbert? This is something that I love doing with this brush. And I do this with the round brush as well. So we'll go over that too when we get to the round brushes. So I'm gonna get some matte medium. This is a really interesting way to create some texture without over blending. So let's say you're painting a field and your reference image has lots of texture in the grass, but you don't want to spend all this time making individual little blades of grass. You can insinuate grass by doing this, and it's really cool. So I have some matte medium and some black on my brush, and what I'm going to do it in here that's pretty dry. I'm going to lay my brush. I'm not putting a lot of pressure. I'm just kind of touching the length of it like that. Just touching it to the canvas. I'm not putting pressure. And then I'm just very lightly, I'm going to drag it to the side. And I picked up just a tiny point of matte medium only. And I'll do it again right here. Now, with the black, I know that doesn't really look like grass, but when you start using colors, especially colors that can work together rather than this black on top of the gray, you're gonna see some really interesting things. And we are actually gonna create water next week, like the ripples on a pond, using this exact technique, just going back and forth between some black and some white. You don't wanna go like this and back and forth and back and forth, because you're just gonna thin it out and end up, you might as well just go like that if that's what you're gonna do. You just wanna lay it down, streak it across, and leave it alone. If you want to go the other way, start back in that same spot and streak it. Let's put just a little bit of white in there to show you the difference. And my black is so wet, so again, I would want to make sure that I'm not overworking this. I'm not going back and forth, back and forth. I'm just going to start right here, touch it down, and light pressure, streak it across, and streak it across. And I really love the texture that I get there. You can't get that kind of texture from going like that. You just get a blend, kind of a stripe. All right, our next brush is a round. So rounds are tapered. So you get a nice point here. Because they're round and the bristles are kind of long, they hold a lot of paint and a lot of moisture. So rounds are kind of like workhorse brushes. When you need paint to go for quite a ways, you probably want to use a round. So let's get some matte medium and some black. Now with rounds, you can definitely make lines. You might get a little bit of breaking, you might get kind of a soft line, and that's because it's tapered. And because it's tapered, as you start to put more pressure on it, the shape of the brush changes a little bit. So rounds are definitely good for making lines, but if you need super crisp, small lines, you might be better off going with a liner. But look at how wide I can get that line by putting some pressure on it. So always when I'm telling you guys it's all about pressure, that's exactly what I mean. See how narrow this brush is? That line is almost as wide as the bristles are long, but I was able to get from this little thin end here to this huge fat end here. It's almost 3 times as wide as the width of the brush. And it's all because of pressure. So if you're using a round brush and you're having a hard time, your lines are too fat, you just have too much pressure on your brush. So put your hand on your canvas, hold your brush down low, hold it like a pencil. See, I have my pinky on my canvas and I'm watching very closely so I can see when the tip of the brush touches. And that's all the pressure I'm putting on there. And I can get nice thin lines, or I can get super fat lines. So they're really good for drawing. You know, if you want to draw something, just kind of quickly sketch it out. I like to use rounds for that sometimes. For filling in, they're really good because again, they hold a lot of paint. They don't have a square hard edge like a flat or a bright that you're going to have to deal with. So you can go around curved corners like that. Nice and easy. They are really good for blending, for shading. So let's do that over here. Now, you don't really want to use it like a flat brush and go back and forth and back and forth. When I'm shading with a round brush, I like to do it one direction at a time, just like that. And this can actually be a very simple way to shade if you've had a hard time with the back and forth with a flat brush. Try a round brush. And again, I am still going to start just below it. And work up into it just like before, but I'm only going one direction. And right back down. A nice smooth blend with almost no effort. I would say that that's probably even an easier way to do shading than using an angle brush. That's a very simple way to do it. I really like to use round brushes when I'm trying to do grasses and foliage. So just like the Filbert, except I'm not going to get quite as much variation. So it's mostly just the point of the brush. And I vary it by how much pressure I put on it. So fat pressure, light pressure. And we can even make leaves, maybe even a little bit easier than the Filberts. So I'm going to start here with almost no pressure, bring it out, press it flatter, and slightly turn it as I bring it up, and that's going to help it end on a point there. Remember that dragging that we did with the Filbert? We can do that here as well. So again, I'm laying it flat, and by lay it flat, I mean the pressure of the brush is really all that's holding it. So just about that pressure, and lightly drag it to the side. You get a little bit more smearing than you do with the Filbert because the bristles are longer and they separate a little bit more. You get a little bit more tug on those bristles than you do with the Filbert. So let's take a little bit of white and we'll just do the same thing here. Just touching it to the canvas. Really, it's just the weight of the brush holding it down. And that almost looks like a distant stormy sky to me. Just lay it down and drag it. I love that texture blend that we get from that. All right, the last style of brush we're going to talk about today are liner brushes. So I have a long and a short liner brush here. Now a short liner brush can look quite a bit like a round, particularly a small round. So here's my number 1 round and my liner brush. But if you notice, the liner brush is a little bit longer. And if you look closely, you can also tell the round here is tapered a little bit more than the liner brush. So we're gonna be able to get nice crisp lines with this brush. It's not great for filling in areas, but it's really great for making grasses and just all kinds of little textures and lines that you might want to make, tree branches, roots, whatever. So we'll start here and we can get, look at this little hairline line. However, just like the round brush, if we put too much pressure on it, we can get a much fatter line. So we'll start here with thin pressure and heavier pressure. So you can vary it a little bit. They're really great for all kinds of graceful type shapes you might want to make. They don't hold a ton of paint because they are so small, and this texture on this canvas is quite hard, so that's why I'm getting some breaking. So if you're going to be doing a lot of liner work and you want crisp, solid lines, I would recommend gessoing and sanding your canvas until it's quite smooth. So for example, here I have this cardstock that's got a much smoother texture. And so we can come onto here and get much smoother lines. It's really great for grasses. So let's say there's our ground. And we can just come here and kind of flick a little bit. If you vary the amount of pressure you're putting on, you can get some grasses that are a little bit fatter. I actually like on this texture of canvas how the ends of the grasses are kind of breaking up a little, because I wouldn't want like cartoon looking grass that's, you know, super pointy on the end like that. I don't want grass that looks like that. I like the grass that looks kind of like that. Just a little softer on the ends, makes it a little bit more natural looking. You can do a little bit of stippling. Even lay it a bit flat and kind of dot a little. Lots of fun things you can do with liners. So our long liner, it holds a little bit more paint than the short liner because the bristles are longer. And you can do a couple of things here. You can either touch it to the canvas and kind of let your hand shake a little as you go, and you can get some really kind of natural looking jaggedy lines if you're doing tree branches or some distant trees that you don't want a lot of definition to. You just want kind of a craggy little look there. Or even lightning and grasses, just like the other ones. We can get some longer grasses through here. See how these ones made nice short grasses, and this one is going to make them a little bit longer. You can also get quite long, smooth, graceful lines, though again, it's probably going to be difficult to do on this heavily textured canvas. Just depends on how steady your hand is and the look you're going for. So let's talk about matte medium. I know there's always a lot of confusion when I use matte medium. People ask what it's for, if they can use something else in place of it. Now, lately I've been using matte medium solely in place of water. If you noticed in all those previous examples, my brushes were completely dry. I did not dip them in water at all. So I use the matte medium now in place of water. It helps thin my paint down a little bit. I can control how much it thins it down. I can use it to help blend, and I can use it to thin down my paint to the point where the paint is a thin wash. Now, yes, all of those things you can technically do with water, but the water is going to underbind your paint, especially if you use way too much of it. The matte medium, on the other hand, has binder in it. So I could take this tiny little speck of black and mix it with matte medium. See how thin that is? You almost can't even see it. And I don't have to worry about that paint being underbinded. You know, if I was using water to get a black that thin, that black would just wipe right off when I apply another layer of paint over top of it, but not with the matte medium. Here's my super thin wash of black. Look at that. See how transparent and thin that is? Let's demonstrate a couple of things. So I wet my brush off, it's pretty dry. I'm just gonna get a little bit of black paint. I'm gonna show you the difference here with and without the medium. So without the medium, just black paint on a dry brush, I get some of the texture of the canvas showing through. And sometimes I want that. We're gonna be working with a lot of layers over the next several weeks, and there's gonna be many times where I do just like this without using any matte medium to keep that texture. Now, I'm gonna load up with some matte medium. This is essentially the equivalent of dipping your paintbrush in the jar of water. And then I'm just gonna pull out some black and mix that medium in with it. And now, I've got about the same amount of paint on my brush as I had here, but now I'm getting much less of that texture. Much, much less. If I have a hard line there that I decide I don't want, I can come in and pick up a little bit of matte medium on the end of my brush. I didn't mix it in with my paint, and just lightly go over it. And I can start to blend. So if I had another color there, I could almost make it look like this black was blended in with it, because see how transparent it made it there. And you can keep going with that. A little more matte medium. A little more. Depending on how much energy you're putting into it, not like I'm doing here, obviously, you could take solid black and blend it out to nothing and never have to worry about underbinding that paint. That's really helpful to know, because sometimes you can't get certain looks by mixing paint, but by layering it, you can get those looks. And one of the goals that I made for myself for September was to not be such a blender. I tend to blend, 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 blend. And I don't want to blend anymore. Well, I still want to be able to blend, but I want to work on layers, creating the illusion of a blend without actually blending. And these are a couple of techniques that we're going to use to get there. All right, now let's talk about how we clean brushes. And I intentionally just now scrub the paint down into this brush. See, it's almost to the ferrule. So let's go over exactly how to clean a brush properly. So I have my brush here, and I always have 2 jars of water on my workstation, and one is to wash paint off with, the other is to rinse. And then I always have a clean paper towel. So we're gonna take our painted brush and put it in our wash jar. And this is just water, there's nothing else in here. I've got it sitting on the bottom of the jar. See how the brush is just in there? And the thing you don't want to do is stab it. I see so many people stab their brushes, and you're going to destroy that brush pretty quick if you stab it. You just want to let it sit on the bottom of the jar, still on the bottom there, and then swish back and forth. Almost like, pretend like the bottom of the jar is dirty, and your goal is to actually clean the bottom of the jar. But it's not so dirty you have to scrub at it. You just have to gently wipe at it all the way across the bottom. Pull it out, wipe it on the edge to check, see if you're seeing any more when it runs down right here. I know it's hard for you guys to see on my muddy jar, but just check to see if you see any paint coming out of it. That looks pretty good. We'll come into our rinse jar, and you want to keep this water as clean as possible. Same thing. You can see a little bit better here how it's sitting on the bottom. And I'm just gonna swish it back and forth. See, I'm not really mushing it. It's bending a little bit, but not too bad. So just the same thing, just back and forth. Wipe it on the edge. And here's how we're gonna test to make sure that we did a good job. We're gonna bring our paper towel over. We're gonna wipe our brush and slightly bend it up. I'm not cranking it, it's just a very slight bend. and you're gonna check to see if any of the paint deposits there. If you just wipe it flat, you may not see it, but check both sides. Just kind of bend it up a little bit, about a 45-degree angle. And I actually did a pretty good job. Let me show you what it would look like if we didn't. So here I put a little more paint in it and I didn't clean it very well. So I'm gonna push it down like that, bend it up, and see, you can see a little bit of that black there. So you would want to start the whole process over again in your wash jar. You can check it after that as well. In your rinse jar, and check it. Then, this is very important, wipe your brush off completely from the handle all the way to the bristles, and never pull on the bristles. So don't pinch them like that and then pull it back. But you can wrap the paper towel around it and just kind of pinch and squeeze some of that water out. Wipe it flat, flat. And then I like to do the edges too, just to make sure my brush is perfectly reshaped. If you let it dry with a bend in it or at a weird angle, it's gonna stay like that for a while. You can get it back, but it takes a lot of work. I actually have a brush that the little plastic tip fell off while it was being shipped to me, and it was bent like that, and I've almost got it back flat now, but it does take quite a bit of work. So dry it off as well as you can and make sure that the shape is perfect. Let me show you with a round brush, just because a round brush is a little bit different. You can still test it like we did, but see how it deforms? Don't leave it laying there to dry like that, because that's gonna make an ugly brush. So I'm gonna put it in my rinse water, shake it back and forth, and just let it come out without wiping it so it doesn't deform. Again, I'm gonna wipe the whole handle, the ferrule, and the bristles off, and I'm kind of twisting it back and forth as I pull it backward. And that helps keep a nice sharp point. And then just check it, make sure it's not cranked to one side or the other. And that is a perfectly shaped round brush. All right, now that we're done painting for the day, we are gonna go over how to properly clean your brushes. Now you should do this after every time that you paint and use them. Because even though we just wash these, in the wash and rinse and paper towel, there could still be some matte medium, some binder left in them. Just because pigment didn't transfer doesn't mean they're perfectly clean. So let's actually wash them. I prefer castile soap to wash my brushes. It helps get out even dried binder. I haven't tried a brush that I would say is completely ruined, but I have let my brushes go until they're super, super crispy and almost unusable. And I've had the castile soap get it out almost completely, even out of really bad brushes. So what we're gonna do is take our brush, I'm gonna dip it in some clean water. You don't want it to be super wet. The castile soap doesn't foam up too terribly much anyway, and I found that if the brush is too wet, it won't foam up. So I'm just taking a little bit of water and putting it in the palm of my hand, making sure my brush isn't drippy. Now, castile soap is also very, very concentrated. So you just wanna use like a drip, that's it. I'm gonna come into here and very gently, you don't wanna scrub in your hand, but I am kind of making some circles. I'm just gonna go around, kind of back and forth. You might see it foam up a little bit, but if you don't worry about it. I like to press it back and forth like that because if there's any paint down here toward the ferrule, that really helps to loosen it up. This is a brand new brush and the first time I've used it is in this video, so we may not see any color come out of it. But after you've used a brush for a while, if you haven't washed it properly, even though it looks clean, I bet once you do this, you start seeing some colored bubbles. So just do that for a little bit. If those bubbles had color in them, I would rinse it off and I would do it again, and I would keep doing it until those bubbles were completely white. Now in our wash jar, I'm gonna swish it just like we did before to rinse that soap out. And in the rinse jar. Gonna reshape it on my paper towel. Make sure there's nothing weird going on with those bristles. Perfectly shaped brush, and then I'm gonna lay it on a dry paper towel to dry. That is so important. I know that a lot of people will just stick it in a jar or something, not a water jar, not like that, but Stick it in a jar with the bristles pointing upward. What's going to happen with that, if you have it drying like this, all the water that's still in the bristles it's going to pool down in the ferrule. It's going to loosen the glue. It might destroy the wood, and your brush is going to come apart. So you want to rinse it really good like we did. Dry it off on a paper towel. You can kind of press it to the paper towel a bit. Make sure the shape is good. Lay it on a completely dry paper towel. Lay it flat, and don't stand it up until it's dry. So actually I do have a brush I can show you. So my 1/2-inch flat brush, this poor little brush, I have not taken the best care of it. I can tell, you might not be able to tell in the video, it's very fat right here. I can feel it, and it doesn't bend real well right there. So let's clean it in our soap and see if we can get that to soften up. I'm just gonna put a little bit of water in my hand, a couple drops of castile soap. That was probably a little too much. And with the tip of the brush, I'm gonna kind of make some circles there. Kind of flick it back and forth, push it. Oh, and I'm seeing some green. It's very pale, but there's definitely a little bit of a green color to this brush. These larger brushes, you probably don't want to do this so much with the smaller detailed brushes, but the larger brushes, you can come through with your fingernail. You're not gouging at it, you're just almost like raking it, just kind of combing it down toward the ferrule especially. That's going to help kind of break that up. I might or might not wash my brushes as religiously as I'm preaching to you to do. This is a no judgment zone. All right, let's rinse that out. You can even leave this soap in your brush. If you've got a brush that's kind of got a weird angle to it, put a little bit of this castile soap in it, shape it, and let it dry. And once it's completely dry, rinse it out, and it should reshape your brush. That's actually what I'm doing to another brush right now. I'm gonna wash it one more time because I had some colored bubbles, so I wanna keep doing this until those colored bubbles are gone. I can feel a huge difference in this brush now. When I first started, I was having a hard time even getting my fingernail into the bristles, especially down here at the bottom. But now I'm getting my fingernail all the way through the center of the brush. You can even come down here by the ferrule and just very, very gently scrape right there all the way to the ferrule. Sometimes you get that buildup of the color stain at the bottom, and this will help take that off. I'm not too worried about color stain, but that kind of indicates you're starting to get a buildup in there. There is a huge difference there. I can bend those bristles all the way down toward the ferrule now. I don't feel that hard bump in the middle there anymore. So it seems like we took care of that, and this brush can live to paint another day. Hopefully now you have a little bit of a better understanding about the different shapes of brushes, what they're best for, what they might not be best for, and I hope that you're encouraged to do a little bit of experimenting and seeing what you can do with each brush. Another thing that I want you to take from this is that there really isn't a correct brush for a technique. Some brushes definitely work better for certain techniques, but some techniques you can use any brush for. So I don't want you to get too hung up on whether or not you have the right brush or if your brush is different than mine. That said, if you do want to use the same brushes that I'm using, check out my website at paintingwithjane.com/brushes, where you can pick up your very own set of my detail brushes, just like these ones that I use today. Now these are completely custom brushes made just for me, and you won't find them anywhere except on my website. Now I encourage you to take the papers or canvases that you experimented with your brushes on, label them, make some notes about what you like about each brush, what you don't like, what you would like to try to do, what techniques you'd like to try with that brush, and keep them handy with your other reference guides that we made earlier. I hope that this was helpful and informative for you, and I will see you next week with our very first painting for our 30 days of art. So make sure you have those little canvases, detail brushes, and your limited color palette, and your willingness to experiment and learn. Thank you as always for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.